Hello and welcome to the Inside Risk and Compliance podcast. I'm your host, Adam Spencer, Director of AJ Fox Compliance, a specialist recruitment agency focusing on all things law firm risk and compliance. I have seen so many people carve amazing and fulfilling careers in this space, and it really has been a pleasure speaking to people who enjoy doing what they do every day. However, one thing that has really stood out to me is how hard it can be for people to access the bigger picture outside of their team, outside of their firm. We created this podcast to share with you some of the insights, experiences and stories of the most interesting people succeeding inside risk and compliance. Today I am joined by Kate Burt, CEO and founder of Hive Risk. In today's episode we hear about Kate's fascinating journey from law into running a risk and compliance consultancy. We discuss some of the challenges faced by law firms in trying to maintain 100% AML compliance, as well as considering some of the skills shortages facing the industry. I really enjoyed recording today's episode with Kate, and I'm sure you'll be interested in her unique insights as well. Enjoy. So Kate, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me. Feeling good.
Good. Well, thank you so much for slogging all the way down here, because I know you've come down to London from the north, so really appreciate that. So we've done a little bit of an intro already, but people are always really interested to get a sort of deeper understanding of people's career paths, how they've got into law, how they've got into risk and compliance. So keen for you to take us through that a little bit, really, from sort of interest in law to getting into law to where you're at the moment.
Yeah, so I took the traditional route into law. So I am a solicitor.
Yep.
Qualified early 2000s and very much went that traditional route, get your training contract. Eventually, I say skipping across that because firstly you've got to get your whole degree, you've got to get the training contract, which even back then it was like gold dust or the golden ticket to try and get a training contract, and I know it's really difficult now as well. So
Absolutely.
I've sort of skipped through a major part of my life there, go, just get qualified. But went that route very early on, sort of paint by numbers. And at that time in early 2000s, it was like litigation boom. The sort of personal injury capital of the world is where I was studying, that being Liverpool, if anyone remembers that, sort of the slip trip. So at that time, there were a lot of opportunities around for litigators. So naturally, my training contract and early career was in litigation because that's where the opportunities were. I was quite lucky in the early days to get into some really good firms. So prior to even starting my training contract, I worked for Hill Dickinson, which is a big top 50 law firm, doing the defendant insurance work. I then, during my training contract, was with a company called Irving's, which was a very litigious claimant firm. And that's where I really learned how to argue on my feet. There's a lot of advocacy work. As a trainee, we were the ones who did the court work. The court was just across the road. And really learned, it was at that point that I realised actually the law is a business, not, what you learn at law school. So that was really my commercial grounding, was like, okay, right, law firms are there to make money, in a way to act in the best interest of the client. But that was really my first sort of lights on moment about the commerciality that needs to come with running a law firm. I then qualified into Bowman's Lace Moore in Manchester. And again, personal injury, employer's liability, public liability. And I did that for quite a number of years, actually. Very senior. At the time I left the traditional route with where I'd got to, and there was just this crossroads in 2016 that I thought, I want to do something different.
What prompted you to start thinking that? Were you sort of falling out of love with the
I love the work, I love my clients, I love running trials, I love winning trials, I loved losing the odd trial for the learning, but I actually loved that. What I didn't like was the clocking on, clocking off. I didn't like the cage around what fee earning was at that point. There wasn't really, although I did have, so I co-edited a publication. It was at Keogh's at that point, called Liability Aware, and that was my creativity, my creative outlet there. So the idea of that publication is it was for insurers to learn about liability and from trial wins, from case points, and I was heavily involved in that. And it's actually still running now, years later, in all the different sort of niches there. But that was my sort of creative outlet, because at at the core, I'm a creative, I'm entrepreneurial. So I was trying to find my different outlets for that, but it wasn't enough.
Did you sort of know that? Was it doing the book that made you realise, actually, this is something I really enjoy and I'm not doing as much of it as...
I knew that I got a buzz from that. I knew I got a buzz from winning the trials, but you know, running the cases, but you don't, you know, your caseload isn't all trial winners. And I knew there was a piece of me that wasn't being fulfilled in the role as a whole.
Right.
And looking back, it's so obvious that I was an entrepreneur trying to break out, because at that time I'd actually launched a soap making business with my husband called Bar Soap, and so it was cocktail themed soap bars.
Amazing.
And we sold, Etsy was just new at that point, and we sold all over the world, to Paris and New York, and our bars would be flying around.
Did you have an espresso martini bar? Tell me.
We had a coffee bar. We had coffee, but we didn't call it espresso martini there. But we had gin and tonic soap. We had a Guinness soap. So looking back, it's like, oh yes.
And you were just doing that on the side?
I was doing that on the side, and there's a picture of me. I've shared it on LinkedIn in the last 12 months, where I'm in my solicitor suit. And this is when we did dress up to be solicitors, and not everyone does now. But there's a picture of me in front of a big Etsy flag, because I'd just finished work at Berryman's Lace Moor at the time, and I'm holding up my soap because I'd gone from work into like an event. Right. So it was sort of back then. I'm like, yes, I was this like creative closet entrepreneur trying to get out. So it was around 2016 that I thought, I'm just gonna take the leap. I'm not quite sure where it's going to take me, but I know I don't want this, whatever that was. I just knew that wasn't the pull. Was
there something that changed or triggered you to feel like now's the time, or made you feel more comfortable or confident taking that leap?
There was a number of things. At that point, I was reading a lot of books, so I'd got Audible, and now I've read about 160 titles now from that time. But around that time, I was just getting into reading, and I always wanted to read entrepreneurial books. I'd attend entrepreneurial events, and I remember one time it was at something like Inspirational Women in Business Awards, and I was at a table, and everyone was introducing themselves around the table. And I was so inspired by what everyone was saying. And I got to myself and to introduce myself. And I'm saying, I'm Kate, I'm a solicitor, but I hope for better. And it was kind of like, I just remember that and just thinking something's not right. Yeah. And that was a really weird thing but I meant that because I felt like, yes, I've kind of followed that path and I'm really proud of it. But there's something more in me that I'm trying to reach to, which I'm not there. So there was that. And there was also... I think it was like a annual appraisal or something. It all came to head like, do you want to apply for associateship? And I'm looking round at the, no disrespect to the firm at all, but I'm looking around at the partners and I just didn't feel inspired. And that's when I knew I needed to just cut ties. It's
funny because I quit as soon as I qualified, but I had exactly the same sentiment, which was, and again, it's different at different firms. But when I looked around, the partners were like working longer hours. And they seemed less happy and just more overworked. And I thought, that's not a trajectory that I can get particularly excited about. No, so I totally identify with that.
And the pay wasn't that incredibly much more, to be honest. So it's not even like you would be working for the money. So I quit I handed my notice in. That's the nicer way to say it. And with joy in my heart, really, but with nothing to go to. And it was whilst working my notice period that I had a conversation with someone who owned a claims management company, and they wanted to convert to an alternative business structure. And they said, can you be our CULP? Can you help us with the application?
Straight in at CULP level.
I'm like, so I knew about CULPs because they came in a few years earlier. And I was quite candid with him and said, well, I know the code of conduct, because I'm a solicitor, and I can do that role because I am a solicitor, so I'm eligible, if you like. But as long as you understand this is the blind leading the blind, then I'm happy to do it. And that's kind of a little bit about my personality. I am that kind of, right, okay, agree, and then figure out how to make it work. So it was whilst helping with that process and getting them set up, ready for authorization, that I thought, compliance is a thing. Compliance is a niche that I never knew, actually, because working in a big law firm, you've got a compliance team that are there. You don't quite know what they're doing. You just know they're keeping you safe. But I didn't know that was a specialism in its own right at that time. I thought compliance was the code of conduct, the SRA's code of conduct.
Yeah.
So I sort of set up shop on LinkedIn that this is what I'm doing, and I was self-taught, literally from scratch, and learned the hard way about what compliance is and what isn't. And around that time, the GDPR was about to become effective.
Yep.
So I learned the GDPR. I have my legal research skills, so just read the legislation, did all the research, and then just started going out, talking to businesses about it, talking to law firms about it, and got a name in a positive way, a name for myself, that actually I'm someone that looks a bit different, because at that time there weren't many other compliance consultancies out there that were would show up like I would show up. So I'd just put on the camera, go live, and talk in quite a vibrant way, which got me noticed, really. So that was many years ago now. Fast forward, I'd say that my Hive Risk, my consultancy, is, I'd say, one of the leading compliance consultancies for law firms in the country. But that's gone from very humble beginnings to this point.
So how did you go about that self-teaching process? Because it's a big hill to climb, I guess.
So initially, a lot of reading. In the early days, when I skipped out a big bit there.
Go on, what's the big bit?
If you want the
training contract.
If you want no, this is big. So at the time I handed in my notice, my husband and I were looking to expand our family. We had a 3-year-old at the time, but it wasn't, these things, you don't know how long it's going to take. But literally the weekend after I'd finished my notice period, I found out I was expecting, which is incredible. Yeah. Soon after, I found out I was twins.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm like, okay,
focuses the
this
mind.
is a different. I was prepared to take on the risk with 2 children and try and sort of build a new path, but there was that moment where I thought, am I the most reckless person that I know? And I was kind of questioning all my decisions to that point and thinking, how can I do this? But I did it, and I'd turn up, I'd go business networking, and heavily pregnant, going to breakfast meetings, and just on survival almost, this has got to work. This has got to work. So soon after, it's very difficult actually to start a business. It's very difficult to get clients and to get that credibility. So in the early days, whilst I was having lots of good conversations, the work wasn't coming through as fast as I needed it to with a growing family. So I started work with another compliance consultancy called Legal Eye. And actually I learned what compliance was there. So huge gratitude for Legal Eye and that whole period. But it was a steep learning curve, because all of a sudden I realised, it's not just the code of conduct. You've got anti-money laundering, whereas with a litigation background, we didn't need to worry about anti-money laundering back then. And also the regulation changed so much over that period of time that was a massive area which I'd never touched before. Professional indemnity insurance, another big area which is completely new to me. And so I was very much thrown in at the deep end there, and I think they may have thought I knew more than I knew at the time when I was sort of thrown in talking to clients. So I had to learn fast, and that was through asking the right questions, doing a lot of my own research, and figuring it out as I went. So that was a masterclass in itself. And then certainly within 9 months on, it was very difficult traveling around the country with 2 small children at home, and my husband was like, what are you doing? You're out of the house a lot. So I became head of risk at Vincent's in Preston, which is local to me. You can walk there on 3 days a week whilst carrying on the consultancy business. And it was there that I really learned at the coalface how to be in-house head of risk, almost like in-house counsel, because anything can land on your desk, and you don't just point to the guidebook. You have to risk assess it, figure out the options, figure out the best option, and then reassure the board about what's happened, and guide them through. So it's there's not that arm's length consultancy there. You're in the cut and thrust of it, and also you have to have a mind to the commerciality of your decisions.
Yeah.
So that is incredible learning, and there's so many scenarios that came up in that period, and I worked for Vincent's in that way for a number of years, that I still, to this day, a scenario will come up and I was like, I've seen that before, I know what we did.
Brilliant.
You know, and it's just that quick. Whereas if it's brand new to someone that's never seen it, you've got to figure it out, you've got to research it. But once you've got all that experience, you join on your experience and you can answer the question very quickly.
Yeah. I just wanted to take a moment out to thank our amazing sponsor, the International Compliance Association. The ICA are the leading professional body for the global regulatory and financial crime community, offering professional qualifications, world-class events and training. Go check them out online, and if any of the certificates or courses take your fancy, then you can get 10% discount using our code AJFox10 at checkout. So you're working as a head of risk on the one hand, and then another half of the week you're working as a consultant. What was it that made you look at that and say, I don't want to be a head of risk, I don't want to be a consultant, I want to build a consultancy?
I think that was always at my core, that was always in my heart. But there's one thing what you want in your heart, and then the other thing that you've got to pay bills, you've got responsibilities. So I couldn't, in the early days, just, set up, stall, build my business without those other pieces to pay the mortgage, essentially. And I think that was, around that time, as I was sort of growing in experience, my LinkedIn following and my LinkedIn presence was growing, which gave me the confidence to say, actually, I can do this. I can build a business around this. And the name Hive Risk came to me whilst walking over the hill to my mum's one day. Oh, yeah. And it was Hive something. Yeah. I didn't know it was Hive Risk at that time. That came a little bit later. But
why Hive?
Flash of inspiration for one.
Okay.
Two, there's a book on my bookshelf called The Wisdom of Bees, which is about how bees work in the hive and how the principles of how bees work relate to organisations, some of the structuring. So there could be that angle, because that's the first thing I thought of when I thought, hive. There's also the Manchester link as well, which the bee is obviously the well, not obviously.
I didn't know that. The bee, the symbol of Manchester.
If you go to Manchester, now I've said it, everywhere you will see bees on the bins, on the on the grids, on everywhere you'll see bees now. Yeah,
didn't know that. I learn something new every day.
So it was that really, and even when I decided to launch as Hive Risk, I never knew what it would become. Like, it's surpassed all my expectations, and it was more following the breadcrumbs, and we got interest and we got clients, so we had to get more consultants and then proper staff. And also we got 3 big clients, big retainer clients in at once before we were properly set up to service them. So it was the work was coming in, but we needed to grow the business. But knowing that money was coming in gave me the confidence to employ our operations director, our technical director, and some analysts as well. Brilliant. So it was having that confidence, because otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to service the work.
Yeah. That's brilliant. That's an amazing story. So today, who are Hive Risk today, and what do you guys?
Look us up. No, so Hive Risk. So we are the core client base are still law firms, although we work with reg tech companies. Yep. We work with property companies as well, and other professional services company. But today, so we work with law firms from top 200, so even top 10. Yep. Law firms, all the way down to sole practitioners on all aspects of their risk and compliance. And really it's a blend of the traditional consultancy that I did in my early days to actually the in-house role that I had as a head of risk, used in a way that a team delivers that whole service. And again, that was by accident. Because I was looking at it in my head of risk role, I want to do these other things. I can't do that on my own. So asking the firm, can I deliver that service but use my whole team? And there's like, oh, this works. So we can provide that service to other law firms. Yep. So now we've got about 10 law firms that we are their in-house compliance team.
Yeah.
So that's quite unique in the way we deliver that.
What's your biggest focus? Is there a particular area that as a business you're particularly strong on?
We're very strong on anti-money laundering. The main reason for that is because that's where the demand is.
I was going to ask you about that, because we've been seeing, the SRA, scrutinising firms around AML, fines every day. You log on, there's a new firm being fined. What's your take on the situation?
I think it's very, very difficult for law firms at the moment with their AML obligation. So it's sort of it's tightened since sort of 2007. It's sort of got tighter and tighter and tighter in terms of what's expected from law firms. And many firms, so some firms have got this down, and they're very good at what they do.
Yeah.
But many firms are struggling to sort of run their business, have a focus on their actual service delivery for their clients, and at the same time they've got to keep pace with the change in regulation and also the compliance of that AML regulation, which there is no bottom to. So you can research and read about anti-money laundering all day. There's always more that you don't know or you've not come across before. So I think it's very difficult for firms to achieve 100% compliance. And I don't think that actually exists. Even in the best firms, you can find something that isn't quite right. So you've got that side of it, the expectation on firms, and the focus that and expertise they might not necessarily have to have it. Then the perfect storm with now the regulator is taking that really seriously. And so the COFA conference, which is the big compliance conference for the SRA compliance officers every November, at the last conference there, the opening address from Paul Phillip, the CEO of the Law Society, the SRA, was like, and I've said this a number of times in sort of different seminars, it was like being in a high school auditorium, being told off by the head teacher about our compliance, AML compliance, and basically saying, patience has run out essentially, and on that same day it was announced that the risk assessment warning from the SRA came out on that day. I think it was the 18th of 18th of November. Anyway, that time, a year, just over a year ago, and then the increase in fines as well. So firms seeing those headlines and also seeing the increase in resource the SRA are putting into the audits and fining, have sort of woken up that actually this is a board level issue. This isn't something that can kind of be brushed away to leave it to the compliance team, leave it to the fee earners. That it needs a board approach to tackle it.
And with the tightening of the regs and with the SRA being very hot on this, how are you seeing firms approach the challenge of clients wanting to undertake transactions that involve digital currencies and crypto?
Yeah, I mean that's an area that we're particularly strong on, because we have a particular one of our consultants that's his bag. He's a sort of a crypto expert, and we're seeing where we typically see it is in sort of conveyancing transactions, and a client will want to pay part of the house purchase with an amount that has been raised through crypto assets, typically Bitcoin or something like that. Often it's sort of low level amounts, and when you're doing source of funds inquiries, you need to account for where the money's coming from, and to to sort of put that risk assessment to it. So fee earning teams are needing to look at, is that legitimate, how the money's being raised. It can be very complex to look at. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's straightforward and it's a small amount of money and it all makes sense. Other times it can be very sort of complex, the way the money's been accumulated. So typically we'll get contacted there to say, can we do a one-off instruction referral on a particular matter, because they can't push it through compliance because they don't have the expertise to know what they're looking at. And often the client is potentially wealthy, really potentially good client that they don't want to lose, but at the same time they don't know what they're looking at. So we've literally just had a similar instruction like that, and we were able to look at it and give an expert opinion on that, which either brings the law firm client to a position as, yes, we're comfortable with this, let's proceed, or no, we're not comfortable, stop. and then they've got the choice point there as to whether they need to make a report or not to the NCA. So what we really do there is give clarity to their own decision making, because we know what we're looking at there, or what makes sense and what doesn't, whereas there's a blind spot there often with firms.
And in terms of those blind spots, I'm guessing you must be quite close to where the gaps are in terms of skill sets in law firms, because you're plugging those holes, right? What are you seeing? Are you seeing a trend in terms of the skill sets that are missing in risk and compliance teams?
Yeah, particularly source of funds investigation. And I think it is improving, and training's getting better in this area as well. But still, we see that's the biggest weak spot really in fee earning teams, is knowing what to look for and evidence what they're looking for. So it's gone from a situation where, for example, just asking for 6 months bank statements. As long as you've got the bank statements, put them on file, don't even read them. That's sort of the worst case scenario, which unfortunately does happens less. But actually it's understanding what's in there and does it make sense. And actually bank statements may not be the answer, where it's really getting to grips with where is this money coming from, what's the overall picture, rather than routinely can have some bank statements. Often it's more nuanced than that, and asking the right questions before asking for the evidence is really important, because you don't know what evidence you need until you've understood the background.
Are there places where you're seeing these skill sets being created more, or types of firms that are investing more in it? Because one of the things we see, I guess, as a recruitment agency is we have clients who will come to us and they'll be asking, typically one of the challenges is management level skill sets. And the question I always look back at the industry and think about is, where are they being created? Where is that skill set actually being invested in? Where are firms training individuals to become great managers, investing in courses and things like that? And often it's just not there. That's why we're struggling to find it. But are you finding there's places where firms are investing in better due diligence? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. We see that sort of day to day, because if they're reaching out to us, then they are investing in that way. And we're also seeing firms take more seriously the role of the compliance manager or the role of head of risk, and actually paying for those bigger salaries you need to be, which I'm sure you're seeing as well in terms of trend. So rather than it being a sort of a junior level role that's being plugged in to do compliance, is actually going to know this is a really mission critical role to get right, and we have to pay for that. So we're seeing that as well, actually much more investment going into building those teams out. And then in terms of that, creating that experience, as I described in my sort of early years, it's that learning on the job. Is you just can't beat that actual experience, because you can sort of research and you can get the theory down, but actually it's a whole different story when you're actually in the cut and thrust of having to make these compliance calls. There's so much that goes into it in terms of risk assessment on the actual regulation, the commercial aspect of it as well, how to communicate internally about it. There's so many lights firing off in a compliance officer's brain when they're trying to navigate that, and that comes with experience.
So if someone is an aspiring compliance officer or compliance manager, you've worked in-house at head of level, you've worked as a consultant in other consultancies, and now you run a consultancy. Is there any advice that you would give individuals either aspiring to work in this space or trying to sort of step up the career path in this space?
I suppose it depends what they want to get in the end from it, because it may be that they want to go really niche, so it might be particularly AML they want to go into, but risk and compliance is absolutely huge area. So my advice would be not necessarily to go ultra niche too early in compliance, and actually look at what's available for those more generalist roles. Perhaps in a regional practice, so that you get exposed to everything. Whereas if the bigger the firms they get, whilst that's incredible, experience, incredible in your CV, often it's niched down. So it might just be on, client matter inception, for example, or it might just be in the professional indemnity insurance team, something like that. Whereas when you're at the smaller firms, if you're the compliance lead or even an assistant to compliance, literally anything can drop on your desk. So that's great for experience, but it also, you see the wider spectrum of what compliance is so that you can select what your favourite is.
Yeah. And I know one of the things we were talking about, I guess, before this podcast was the importance of making sure you understand the issue you're facing and the impact of maybe demonstrating that you don't understand it to fee earners and how that can sort of negatively impact things.
Yeah. So one thing I should mention actually, which I do think is a real problem, and hopefully it's getting better, is that often solicitors within law firms will view more dimly a compliance officer who's not a solicitor, which I totally, don't agree with at all. So I've seen very good compliance officers who are solicitors, and I've seen many solicitors who don't know the first thing about compliance, sadly. So I think that role does need some respect around it, but I think it's worth knowing as a compliance officer, you've got to know what you're talking about to get the respect of the fee earning teams, so that they know that you're, your stuff on compliance, but also the commercial impact of it. Because there is a problem with compliance having the perception as computer says no, or just black and white, business prevention department. So just being really mindful of that, because I know I was speaking to law firms as well where they have gripes with the compliance teams, and often it's compliance people that have come from financial services background where it is more black and white. Is that's their biggest gripe, is they're not seeing the shades of grey, and they're not taking a risk-based approach when they're just interacting with the fee earners to say no, you can't do that, because the fee earner wants to know why and understand why they can't do it, because otherwise it just looks like you're being a blocker for the sake of it. In terms of the question about understanding the issue, I think that's really key to understand that when you get as a compliance analyst, if you get an email through from a fee earning team with a scenario, no, that's not all the facts. They're giving you a packaged up version, probably in a rush, and there'll be layers to the background to that case. So, and it will vary depending on the stakes and the severity of the issue, but not to take a query at face value and to pick up the phone or go and speak to, if you're in the office with them, to get a deeper understanding of what they're actually asking for, because that will help you give them an accurate answer and prevent any miscommunication and the compliance individual getting the reputation as they've got the wrong answer, when actually it was maybe the right answer in a certain set of scenarios, whereas actually they didn't have all the information. I liken it to a multiple choice question on the LPC. So I've spoken to someone recently about this when I did the legal practice course. I've got multiple choice answers, and I would be thinking, well, it depends. If this is this, then that is it. It's B. If these are the facts, then that is. So, and it's a little bit like that. So answering compliance queries, don't view it as a multiple choice question. Actually, what's the background, what's the nuances to the question?
That's fantastic. Well, Kate, this has been super insightful, really interesting. I know you get involved in other things. If people want to see or hear more Kate, I know you guys do a weekly talk and you've got other things going on. Do you want to talk about those a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So you can find us on LinkedIn. So I post a lot on LinkedIn, and our technical director Gavin Bull posts a lot on LinkedIn. Really good stuff, so do connect with us there. Our website, we've got loads of free videos as well, which you might want to sort of dig into that. So there's one on crypto, there's one on offshore source of funds. So if we actually package those up and sold them, it's thousands of pounds worth of goodies on there, but that's all free. And then every Wednesday, myself and Steve Brett from E3 Compliance Training co-host a weekly discussion forum. We have been running them every Wednesday at 12 for the last 4 years, and it's a group of compliance officers or senior people within law firms that have an interest in compliance, and every Wednesday we talk about what's topical in law firm risk and compliance, usually a specific theme, usually guest speakers. But what's really important about those sessions is that it's run to Chatham House rule. So closed space, a safe space for law firms share challenges and insights. So that's another one. The other big thing on our calendar is the Great Big Legal Offsite, which is not the Bake Off. It's something that Hive Risk launched with Rob Hanna from Legally Speaking podcast last year, and essentially the idea of that is it's a space for small to medium sized law firms. It's like a company offsite, but actually the company is the legal ecosystem. So we come together on actually where our offices are, HQ, on a nice holiday park, and we basically have some really incredible speakers there. It's not compliance focused, but compliance obviously is a part of it, but it's more about future proofing the small to mid-sized law firm. So that's 3rd of July. We're running that again up north, depending on where you're listening in from.
Amazing, that's really helpful, and I can definitely recommend the compliance talks as well. We've been involved in one. I've listened to a few of them. Is really really great sort of forum for conversation. So again, Kate, thanks so much. That's been super interesting, and I'm sure we'll speak to you again in the future.
Thanks so much.
Thanks. We really hope you enjoyed listening to today's podcast as much as we enjoyed recording it. If you did, please do us a huge favour and share it with a friend or a colleague. The more people we can get listening, the more time and energy we can get into recording more episodes and getting the best guests and the most interesting stories and insights. I want to say a huge thank you to the ICA for their support, to Ty and Karem here in the studio, and a massive thanks to Kat for making sure everything runs so smoothly behind the scenes. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, follow us on LinkedIn to make sure you never miss an episode. Thanks for listening.